Marcus had built his entire career on instinct, 30 years buying and selling antiques, and now his daughter Sarah showed up at his warehouse with a baby strapped to her chest and desperation in her eyes, asking if she could work the upcoming estate auction because her husband left and she needed the money, and Marcus wanted to say yes, but babies cry and clients get annoyed, and this was the Vandermeer collection, the biggest sale of his career. Items worth potentially millions scattered among worthless junk, and he couldn't afford distractions. But Sarah was his daughter, and that baby, little Owen, just 8 months old, stared at Marcus with these impossibly calm, dark eyes. So Marcus said, "Fine, you can catalog items in the back room. Just keep him quiet." And Sarah thanked him with tears in her voice and got to work immediately, surrounded by boxes of estate items that needed sorting and tagging before the auction in 2 weeks. The first strange thing happened on day 3, when Sarah was cataloging a box of old books, Owen sleeping in a portable crib nearby, and she picked up what looked like a leather journal, nothing special, cracked spine, water damage, maybe worth $20. But when she set it on the table, Owen woke up and started reaching for it, making these urgent little sounds, and babies reach for everything, so Sarah ignored it. But Owen got more insistent, almost frantic, until she handed him the journal just to calm him down, and the moment his tiny fingers touched the cover, he went completely still, silent, just holding it with this focused expression that seemed impossible for an 8-month-old. And Sarah felt something cold run down her spine, but she shook it off, took the journal back. Owen immediately started fussing again. She gave it back. He went silent, and she thought maybe it was just the texture he liked. Babies are weird about textures. So she tested him with other leather items, but he showed no interest, only that specific journal. And when she finally looked closer at it, she noticed the inscription inside, a signature that made her stop breathing. Because if she wasn't mistaken, this was a first-edition travel diary by Theodore Whitmore, the explorer who disappeared in the Amazon in 1887, and she'd read about one of his journals selling for $90,000 at Christie's 3 years ago. But this couldn't be real. Could it? Estate sales had valuable things sometimes, but finding something like this was lottery odds, and she didn't want to get her father's hopes up over nothing, so she quietly set it aside to research later. But Owen cried every time she moved it away from him, this persistent, unhappy cry that only stopped when the journal was near him, and Sarah didn't know what to think about any of it. Marcus came back the next morning and found Sarah looking exhausted, Owen sleeping finally, and she told him about the journal, showed him the signature, and Marcus held it with shaking hands because he'd heard of Whitmore. Every serious collector had. And if this was authentic, they weren't looking at thousands but potentially hundreds of thousands. And he asked Sarah how she found it, and she hesitated, then told him the truth about Owen's reaction, and Marcus laughed. Said babies don't authenticate antiques. She'd just gotten lucky looking through that particular box. But Sarah insisted there was something different about the way Owen responded to it. And Marcus said he'd get the journal appraised, but let's not start believing in baby psychics. And Sarah felt foolish for even suggesting it, but she couldn't shake the memory of Owen's face when he touched that journal, the way he'd gone so still and focused. The appraiser came 2 days later, a thin woman named Dr. Chen, who specialized in historical documents. And she examined the journal for 3 hours while Marcus paced and Sarah tried to keep Owen entertained. And finally, Dr. Chen looked up and said, "It's authentic, museum quality. Conservative auction estimate between $200,000 and $300,000. And Marcus actually sat down hard in his chair because that kind of money could change everything for his business. Pay off the loan on the warehouse, fund his retirement. And Sarah felt this surge of pride that she'd been the one to find it, but also this nagging question about Owen. And over the next few days, she started testing him, casually, holding up different items from the estate collection while he played on his blanket, watching his reactions, and most things got no response. Normal baby indifference. But occasionally something would catch his attention in that same intense way. A tarnished silver frame that turned out to be Cartier. A painted vase she later discovered was signed by a notable arts and crafts artist. Nothing as valuable as the journal, but items worth hundreds or thousands instead of tens. And each time Sarah researched what Owen had responded to, she found something genuinely valuable. And the pattern was undeniable now. Her baby somehow knew, somehow sensed worth in objects the way some people can taste poison in food. And she didn't tell her father yet because it sounded insane. But she started keeping a private list. Every item Owen reacted to and its eventual appraised value. And the correlation was perfect, 100%. And Sarah didn't believe in magic. But she didn't believe in coincidences either, not like this. The Vandermeer auction was 1 week away when Marcus brought in the centerpiece items, the ones he'd been storing in climate-controlled security because they were the real moneymakers, a collection of jewelry and art that the Vandermeer family claimed included pieces from European royalty, and Marcus had already spent $30,000 getting initial appraisals on 12 specific items, the ones that seemed most promising, and those 12 were insured for $4.2 million total. And the whole auction's success depended on those items authenticating well and attracting serious bidders. But there were still dozens of other pieces from the collection that Marcus hadn't bothered appraising because they seemed ordinary. Costume jewelry, replica art, the kind of filler items wealthy families accumulate over generations. And Marcus was focused on the Big 12, printing glossy catalogs, contacting collectors. When Sarah asked if she could look through the remaining Vandermeer items with Owen, and Marcus was distracted, said, "Sure, whatever," not really paying attention. So Sarah spread the unappraised pieces across a table in the back room. Maybe 40 different items, necklaces and rings and small paintings and decorative boxes. And she set Owen on a blanket nearby and watched. And at first he ignored everything, playing with his own toes. But then his head turned toward the table, and he started doing that reaching thing, that focused, urgent reach. And Sarah followed his gaze to a brooch, simple gold, small pearls, nothing that stood out, Victorian maybe, probably worth a few $100s, and she picked it up and brought it to Owen, and the moment he touched it, he did that thing again, went completely still, and Sarah's heart started racing because she'd learned to trust this reaction. And she looked at the brooch more carefully, turned it over, and saw a mark she didn't recognize, so she took photos and sent them to a jewelry appraiser Marcus sometimes worked with. And 30 minutes later her phone rang, and the appraiser's voice was sharp with excitement, asking where she got this. And Sarah said it was part of the Vandermeer estate, and the appraiser said the mark indicates this is from Fabergé, likely an imperial gift. And if it's authentic, this isn't a few $100s, this is potentially 50 to 80,000, maybe more. And Sarah felt dizzy because Owen had picked it out from 40 other pieces, and Marcus had missed it completely. And when she told her father, he came running back to look at the brooch, and he was quiet for a long time, then asked Sarah how she found it. And she told him the truth, all of it, the journal, the silver frame, the vase, the pattern of Owen's reactions. And Marcus listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he looked at Owen, who was chewing on his own hand, oblivious. And Marcus said, "This is impossible." And Sarah said, "I know, but it keeps happening." And Marcus said, "Babies don't have expertise in antiques." And Sarah said, "I know that too, but I'm telling you what I've seen." And Marcus ran his hand through his gray hair and said, "Let's test it, really test it. Controlled conditions." And Sarah agreed. They set it up like an experiment the next day. Marcus gathered 30 items, 10 valuable, 10 worthless, 10 middle range. And he didn't tell Sarah which was which. And they put Owen on the floor with all 30 items spread around him in random order. And they watched. And Marcus had his arms crossed, skeptical. And Sarah was nervous because what if Owen didn't respond? What if the whole thing was just coincidence after all? But after a few minutes, Owen started crawling. And he went straight to a small wooden box that Marcus had appraised at $14,000. And Owen touched it and did his still focused thing. And then he crawled to a painting, a small oil painting in a damaged frame. And Owen reached for it. And Marcus checked his notes. And that painting had been authenticated as a minor work by a pre-Raphaelite artist, worth around $8,000. And Owen crawled to 4 more items, and all 4 were valuable. And he ignored everything worthless. And Marcus stood there watching his grandson identify valuable antiques with perfect accuracy. And he said out loud, "This isn't possible." But it kept happening. And finally, Marcus sat down on the floor next to Owen and said, "Okay, I don't understand this, and I don't know how to explain it, but I'm seeing it." And Sarah felt this relief that her father believed her. And Marcus said, "We need to be very careful about this. We can't tell anyone. People would think we're crazy, or they'd want to exploit Owen. And Sarah agreed immediately, protective, but Marcus was already thinking, and he said the auction is in 5 days. We have over 300 items in that sale. I've appraised maybe a third of them personally. What if there are other valuable pieces I missed? And Sarah knew where this was going. And Marcus said, would it be okay to let Owen look at everything, just once? And Sarah hesitated because using her baby's strange ability felt wrong somehow. But they needed the money, both of them. And if Owen could help identify valuable items that would otherwise sell for nothing, wasn't that better for everyone? So she said yes, but carefully, no stress on him. And Marcus promised. They spent 2 days going through the entire auction inventory, Sarah bringing items to Owen in small groups, while Marcus cataloged his reactions, and Owen identified 23 additional pieces that warranted closer appraisal, things Marcus had dismissed as low value. And when Marcus got them properly authenticated, 16 of those 23 turned out to be genuinely valuable, not all worth tens of thousands, but enough to matter. A signed print here, a rare book there, a piece of silver with an important maker's mark, and the total added value to the auction was just over $300,000. And Marcus kept saying, I would have sold these for nothing. I would have bundled them in lot sales for $50. And Sarah watched her father transform from skeptical to amazed to almost reverent around Owen, and she wasn't sure how she felt about any of it. This ability her son had that she didn't understand and couldn't explain. The auction day arrived and the warehouse was packed with collectors and dealers, people from 3 states who'd seen the catalog and knew the Vandermeer collection was serious, and Sarah stayed in the back with Owen, watching on a video feed, and the bidding was strong from the start, the jewelry and art going for good prices, and Marcus was in his element, working the room, and everything was going according to plan until they reached lot 47, a group of mixed Victorian jewelry that Marcus had estimated at $800 to $1,200 total, and Sarah watched as a woman in the front row kept bidding, pushing the price up, and it sold for $3,800, and Marcus looked confused but pleased. And after the auction, the woman came back to the office and she was angry, demanded to examine the items more carefully, and Marcus let her, and she pulled out one piece, a simple gold ring with a small red stone, and she said this is a Burmese ruby, natural, probably 2 carats, easily worth $15,000 alone, and she accused Marcus of misleading bidders by hiding it in a lot. And Marcus said he had no idea. He'd examined that lot himself and thought it was all costume pieces. And the woman said, well, either you're incompetent or you're a fraud, and she threatened to report him to the auction board. And Sarah came out then, Owen in her arms, and she said her father wasn't lying. He genuinely didn't know about the ruby. And the woman said then, how did it end up in the lot? And Sarah had no good answer because the truth was, Owen had never reacted to that ring. She'd held it near him twice and he'd shown no interest. And later, when Sarah checked her notes, she realized the ring had been in a mixed group that Owen had mostly ignored, and maybe he'd been tired or distracted. Or maybe the ability wasn't perfect, had limits, and this was the first real mistake. And Sarah felt sick, thinking about what could have happened if the woman had been more connected or more vindictive. And Marcus calmed the woman down by offering to buy the ring back at fair market value, which cost him $11,000 out of his commission. But Sarah saw how shaken her father was. And that night in his office, Marcus said, we got lucky today. That woman could have destroyed my reputation. And Sarah said, I'm sorry. Maybe we shouldn't have relied on Owen so much. And Marcus said, no, it worked. We made good money, but we need to be smarter, more careful. And there was something in his voice that worried Sarah, an edge of excitement that didn't match the fear he should have been feeling. And she said, maybe this was a one-time thing. Maybe we should just forget about Owen's ability. And Marcus looked at her and said, do you know how rare this is? What he can do? And Sarah said, I know it's strange. And Marcus said, it's more than strange. It's valuable. Think about what we could do, the finds we could make. And Sarah said, he's a baby, not a business tool. And Marcus said, I'm not suggesting we exploit him. I just mean we should appreciate what this could mean. And Sarah didn't like the conversation, felt protective, and she said, I think we should stop testing him, stop using his ability. And Marcus backed off, said, of course, you're right. But Sarah could tell he didn't really agree. Things went back to normal for a while. Sarah got her own apartment with the auction money, started working for her father part-time, and Owen grew and changed, started pulling up on furniture, babbling, doing normal baby things, and the strange ability seemed to fade into the background. Something Sarah almost convinced herself she'd imagined, except she had her notes, the documented evidence, and she kept those notes hidden, and she didn't bring Owen around the warehouse much anymore. Felt uneasy about the way Marcus looked at him sometimes. This speculative look like he was seeing a tool instead of his grandson. And 3 months after the Vandermeer auction, Marcus called Sarah and said he had an opportunity, a private sale, very high-end collector liquidating part of his collection, and he wanted Sarah's expertise on some pieces. And could she bring Owen, just for an hour? And Sarah said no immediately, but Marcus pushed, said this could be $1 million sale. And Sarah said that's exactly why I don't want Owen involved. And Marcus said he's my grandson too. I just want to see him. And Sarah knew it was manipulative, but she also felt guilty for keeping them apart. So she agreed to visit. But she said, I'm not testing Owen on anything, we're just visiting. And Marcus said, of course, just visiting. The collector's house was in the hills, huge and cold, filled with art and antiquities, and the collector himself was an old man named Grayson, who looked at Owen with disinterest and told Marcus he had 2 hours to examine the items he was willing to sell. And Marcus brought Sarah to a room where maybe 200 objects were displayed, furniture and art and collectibles, and Grayson said, make your offers on anything you want. And Marcus started examining pieces, taking notes. And Owen was fussy, overtired from the drive, and Sarah walked him around the room, trying to calm him. And she wasn't paying attention to what Marcus was doing until Owen suddenly lurched in her arms, reaching toward a painting on the wall, and Sarah instinctively moved closer, and Owen's hand touched the frame and he went quiet. And Sarah felt that old chill, and she looked at the painting. It was abstract, modern, signed by someone named Richter, and she didn't know art well, but something about Owen's reaction made her look closer, and she took a photo of the signature and searched on her phone, and her stomach dropped because this might be Gerhard Richter, one of the most expensive living artists, and a painting like this could be worth millions. And she looked around for her father, and he was across the room examining furniture, and Sarah didn't know what to do, because if this was real, if this painting was worth what she thought, they couldn't afford it. Grayson wouldn't sell it for what they could pay, and if she told Marcus, he'd find a way to try. And Sarah had this moment of clarity that this ability of Owen's was dangerous, that it could lead them into situations they couldn't handle, and she decided not to say anything, just gently moved Owen away from the painting. And he cried, but she walked him out of the room, and Marcus came out 20 minutes later with notes on 12 pieces he wanted to buy. And he asked Sarah what she thought, and she said they all seemed fine, and Marcus said, did Owen react to anything? And Sarah lied and said no, nothing, and Marcus looked disappointed, but he didn't push it, and they left, and Sarah felt relieved and guilty in equal measure. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep, thinking about the painting, wondering if she'd made the right choice. And she realized she needed to make a decision about Owen's ability, about whether to acknowledge it or suppress it. And she thought about her son growing up being used to identify valuable objects for other people's profit, thought about him never having a normal childhood, always being seen as useful instead of just loved. And she decided she wouldn't tell anyone else about what he could do, wouldn't use it again, would let him be just a regular child. And she felt good about that decision until 2 weeks later when Marcus called her, his voice strange, and said Grayson's collection just went to auction at Sotheby's. And Sarah said okay, and Marcus said that Richter painting we saw, the abstract one, it sold for $4.3 million, and Sarah went cold. And Marcus said I didn't even look at it closely. I thought it was a print or something. And there was accusation in his voice. And he said, did Owen react to it? And Sarah couldn't lie to her father directly, so she said, I don't remember. And Marcus said, Sarah, and she said, it doesn't matter. We couldn't have afforded it anyway. And Marcus said I could have found a way, a partner, a loan. And Sarah said, or we could have gotten in over our heads and lost everything. And Marcus was quiet. And then he said, I think you're afraid of what Owen can do. And Sarah said, maybe I am. And Marcus said, you shouldn't be. This is a gift. And Sarah said it feels like a curse. And they didn't talk for a month after that. Owen's first birthday came and went, and he was walking now, saying a few words, mama and dog and more. And Sarah had a small party at her apartment, just a few friends from her mom's group. And she didn't invite Marcus because they still weren't really speaking. And during the party, One of the other moms admired a necklace Sarah was wearing, said it looked vintage, and Sarah said it was her grandmother's, nothing special. And Owen toddled over and reached for the necklace, and Sarah lifted him up and he touched it, and did that thing, that focused stillness, and the other mom didn't notice, but Sarah did. And after everyone left, she looked at the necklace closely for the first time in years, and she saw marks she'd never noticed, and she looked them up and realized the necklace was Victorian, probably worth several $1,000s. And she sat on her couch holding Owen and the necklace, and she started crying because she couldn't escape this. Owen's ability was real and permanent, and she didn't know how to handle it. And she called her father, and when he answered, she said, "I'm sorry." And Marcus said, "I'm sorry too." And Sarah said, "We need to talk about Owen. Really talk." And Marcus came over that night, and Sarah told him everything. About the Richter painting, about her fears. And Marcus listened, and he said, "I understand why you're scared." And Sarah said, "I don't want him to be used." And Marcus said, "Neither do I. He's my grandson." "But Sarah, this ability, we can't just ignore it." And Sarah said, "Why not?" And Marcus said, "Because Owen will discover it himself eventually. He'll realize he can sense value in objects, and he'll have questions. And wouldn't it be better if we guided him, taught him to understand it, instead of letting him figure it out alone?" And Sarah saw the logic in that, but she still felt resistant. And Marcus said, "We don't have to use it for business. We don't have to profit from it. But we should at least acknowledge it, study it, understand it." And Sarah thought about that. And finally she said, "Okay, but we do this carefully. We protect him first." And Marcus agreed. They started keeping a journal, documenting Owen's reactions to different items, trying to understand the ability's rules and limits. And they discovered it wasn't just about monetary value. Owen also reacted to items with historical significance or emotional importance, things that had stories, and the ability seemed to work through touch primarily, but sometimes proximity was enough. And Owen's reactions were stronger with older objects and weaker with new ones. And none of it made scientific sense, but the pattern was consistent. And Sarah started researching psychometry and object reading, fringe theories about how some people could sense an object's history through touch, and nothing she found was credible, but it was the closest explanation they had. And Marcus said, "Maybe we should take him to a university, have him studied." And Sarah said, "Absolutely not. I won't let scientists poke at my son." And Marcus dropped it. But Sarah could tell he thought she was being overprotective. Owen turned 2 and his ability evolved. He could now point to valuable items from across a room, didn't always need to touch them. And he started trying to tell Sarah about objects, limited toddler vocabulary but clear intent. That one, special, mama look. And Sarah tried to treat these moments casually, didn't want to make Owen feel different or weird, and Marcus gave her a book about children with unusual perceptual abilities. And the book said the most important thing was to not make the child feel abnormal, to integrate the ability into normal life. And Sarah tried to do that, but it was hard when your 2-year-old could identify a rare coin in a pile of change, or knew which of his toys would be valuable someday. And Sarah's friends started noticing that Owen had opinions about objects that seemed sophisticated for his age. And one friend joked that he'd be an art dealer someday. And Sarah laughed, but felt anxious, wondering how long she could keep this secret. The crisis came when Owen was 2.5 and Sarah took him to a children's museum, and they were in the historical exhibit, and Owen got very upset, pointing at a display case and saying, "Wrong, wrong, wrong." And Sarah tried to calm him, but he was insistent, and a museum employee came over and asked if everything was okay. And Owen pointed at a Revolutionary War rifle in the case and said, "Not real." And the employee smiled and said, "That's very observant, but it's definitely real. We have documentation." And Owen started crying, and Sarah had to leave. And in the car, she asked Owen why he said the gun wasn't real. And Owen said, "It feels new, Mama. It doesn't have the old feeling." And Sarah's blood went cold because if Owen was right, if that rifle was a reproduction or a forgery, then the museum had a serious problem. And Sarah didn't know what to do with this information. And she called Marcus and told him what happened. And Marcus said we should tell the museum. And Sarah said, "How do we explain how we know?" And Marcus said, "We don't. We make an anonymous tip." And Sarah said they won't take it seriously without proof. And Marcus was quiet. And then he said, "Unless we can prove Owen's ability to them, show them he can identify fakes." And Sarah said, "No, absolutely not. We're not exposing him like that." And Marcus said, then the museum keeps displaying a forgery. And Sarah said, that's not our problem. And Marcus said, but it could help people, museums, collectors. What if Owen's ability could protect the art world from fraud? And Sarah said, he's 2 years old. And Marcus said, I know. I'm not saying we do anything now. I'm just saying think about the future. Think about what he could do. And Sarah said she didn't want to think about it. She wanted Owen to have a normal life. And Marcus said normal isn't always possible. Sarah didn't tell the museum, and she felt guilty about it for weeks. And she watched the news expecting to see a story about a forgery being discovered, but nothing happened. And eventually she tried to forget about it, but the incident stayed with her. And she realized Marcus was right, that Owen would eventually want to use his ability, would feel compelled to, and she couldn't protect him from that forever. So she started talking to Owen about it in simple terms, explaining that he could feel special things about objects, but it was private, just for family, and Owen seemed to understand in his toddler way, and he stopped pointing out valuable things in public, and Sarah felt like maybe they could manage this. Maybe it would be okay. But then Owen started preschool, and on the second day his teacher pulled Sarah aside and said Owen had an interesting interaction with their classroom globe, and Sarah's heart sank. And the teacher said Owen insisted the globe was very old and very important. And did Sarah know anything about that? And Sarah said no, it's probably just his imagination. And the teacher said, well, it's funny because I looked at the globe more closely after Owen's comment, and it has a maker's mark from 1887. It's apparently a school antique that's been in storage for decades. And the teacher said Owen has quite an eye, and Sarah smiled and said, kids notice funny things. And she went home and told Marcus they had a problem. And Marcus said Owen's ability is becoming too obvious. We need to teach him more control. And Sarah said, how do you teach a 3-year-old to hide a sense that's as natural to him as sight? And Marcus didn't have an answer. They muddled through. Sarah coaching Owen constantly about keeping his special feelings private. And Owen tried his best, but he was just a little kid, and there were slip-ups. Times when he pointed out valuable items at garage sales or reacted to jewelry people were wearing. And Sarah learned to deflect and distract, to make excuses, and she grew exhausted from the constant vigilance. And she thought about what Marcus had said about using Owen's ability to help people. And she wondered if hiding it was actually harder than embracing it. But she couldn't bring herself to expose her son like that. Couldn't risk him being exploited or studied or turned into a spectacle, so they kept the secret, and it became this heavy thing in their lives. This truth they carried that separated them from everyone else. And Sarah sometimes resented Owen for it, and then felt terrible for resenting a child for something he couldn't control. And Marcus noticed she was struggling, and he said, maybe we should find other families like us, other kids with unusual abilities. And Sarah said, where would we even look? And Marcus said, the internet probably, support groups. And Sarah did search but found nothing credible, just conspiracy theories and scams, and she felt more alone than ever. Owen turned 4 and started asking questions about why he could feel things about objects that other people couldn't. And Sarah tried to explain it as a special skill, like how some people can remember every song they hear or draw perfectly without training. And Owen accepted that, but he also started to understand that being different could be bad, that people might treat him weird if they knew, and he became secretive about his reactions. And Sarah saw him suppress his natural responses to valuable objects, saw him teach himself to look away and stay quiet, and it broke her heart because he was learning to hide a fundamental part of himself, and she wondered if she'd made the right choices, if protecting him had actually hurt him. And she talked to Marcus about it, and Marcus said there's no perfect answer here. We're doing our best. And Sarah said our best isn't good enough. He's learning to be ashamed of himself. And Marcus said he's learning to be careful. There's a difference. And Sarah wasn't sure that was true. The turning point came when Owen was almost 5 and Sarah's apartment building had a fire. Not in her unit, but close enough that everything smelled like smoke. And the landlord said they'd need to relocate for a month while repairs were done. And Sarah had insurance, but it was still chaotic and stressful. And she brought Owen to stay with Marcus in his house behind the warehouse. And Owen was upset about the fire, kept asking if their things were okay. And Sarah assured him everything was fine. But Owen was worried about his toys, his books. And Marcus said they'd go retrieve what they could once the building was cleared. And when they finally got back into the apartment, Owen went straight to his room and checked all his stuffed animals and toys. and he picked up this old teddy bear that Sarah's mother had given him, and Owen held it and started crying. And Sarah asked what was wrong, and Owen said, "Grandma's love is in this bear. I can feel it." And Sarah realized Owen didn't just sense monetary or historical value. He could feel emotional significance, connections between objects and people, and that was why he'd been so upset. He could sense which objects carried meaning. And Sarah sat down next to Owen and held him and said, "Grandma's love is in you too, not just the bear." And Owen said, "But what if I lost it in the fire?" And Sarah said, "You didn't." And Owen said, "But I could have. Things can be lost." And Sarah saw then that Owen's ability wasn't just a party trick or a useful skill. It was a burden. He carried the weight of feeling connections to objects that other people couldn't perceive. And he worried about those connections being severed. And Sarah finally understood why she'd been so afraid of his ability. It wasn't about exploitation or spectacle. It was about the responsibility of it, the way it made Owen responsible for preserving connections and histories that other people didn't even know existed. And that was too much for a child, too much weight to carry, and Sarah didn't know how to help him with it. Marcus came in and found them sitting together, and Sarah explained what Owen had said about feeling his grandmother's love in the bear, and Marcus was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "I think we've been approaching this wrong." And Sarah said, "What do you mean?" And Marcus said, "We've been trying to hide Owen's ability, control it, manage it, but maybe we should be teaching him how to use it in a way that feels right to him. Let him decide what to do with it." And Sarah said, "He's 5 years old. He can't make those decisions." And Marcus said, "No, but we can help him understand the options. Help him see that his ability could be a gift instead of a burden." And Sarah said, "I don't want him to feel like he has to use it." And Marcus said, "I'm not saying he has to. I'm saying he should know he can, that there are ways his ability could help people, protect important things, preserve history." And Sarah thought about the museum forgery, about all the other times Owen had identified something important that would have been lost or misidentified otherwise. And she said, "Okay, let's try it your way. But we move at Owen's pace. We let him lead." And Marcus agreed. They started talking to Owen about his ability differently, not as something to hide, but as something to understand. And they explained that some people spent their whole lives learning to identify valuable and important objects. And Owen could do it naturally, and that made him special. And Owen asked if special was good, and Sarah said special is just different, and different can be good if you use it well. And Owen thought about that, and he asked what would using it well mean. And Sarah said that's for you to figure out, but maybe it means helping people protect things that matter, keeping history safe, making sure important objects don't get lost or destroyed. And Owen said like Grandma's bear, and Sarah said yes, like Grandma's bear, objects that carry meaning. And Owen seemed to like that idea, and over the next few months he started pointing out valuable things to Sarah and Marcus again, but with a different energy. Not anxious or suppressed, but matter-of-fact, observational. And he'd say things like that. "Painting is very old. Someone should take care of it. Or this box has a good feeling. Someone loved it." And Sarah encouraged him, thanked him for noticing. And she could see Owen starting to understand his ability as something potentially positive instead of just weird or dangerous. And it felt like progress. When Owen started kindergarten, Sarah was nervous. But Owen had learned enough self-control that he didn't have incidents. And he made friends, played normal games, and his teacher had no idea he could sense value in objects. And that felt like success to Sarah. Owen living a normal life while also having his special ability. Both things coexisting, and she thought maybe they'd found balance finally. But then, in the spring, the school did a fundraiser, asked families to donate items for a silent auction, and Sarah sent in some books and kitchen items. And at the event, Owen walked around looking at the donation tables, and he stopped in front of a cheap-looking ceramic vase. And he said, "Mama, this is very special." And Sarah looked at the vase. It was ugly and dusty. Maybe someone's garage cast off. And she said, "It's nice, sweetie, but let's keep looking." And Owen said, "No, Mama. It's very, very special. You should tell someone." And Sarah felt that old reluctance, didn't want to make a scene, but Owen was insistent. So Sarah found the parent organizing the auction and said, "I think one of the donated items might be more valuable than it looks." And the parent was a tired-looking dad who clearly just wanted to get through the event, and he said, "Which one?" And Sarah pointed to the vase. And the dad said, "Yeah, someone dropped that off last week. I think it's junk, but we'll sell it for something." And Sarah said, "Would you mind if I took a closer look at it?" And the dad said, "Sure, take it home if you want." And Sarah said, "No, I don't want to buy it. I just want to check something." And the dad looked confused but handed her the vase. And Sarah examined it and found a mark on the bottom. And she took a photo and searched it on her phone. And her hands started shaking because, unless she was very wrong, this was a rookwood pottery vase from the arts and crafts movement, potentially worth thousands. And she told the dad. And the dad didn't believe her at first, thought she was trying to get the vase cheaply. But Sarah insisted, and eventually they called in an appraiser who confirmed the vase was authentic and worth between $8,000 and $12,000. And the school fundraiser ended up making enough money to renovate the library, and everyone wanted to know how Sarah had spotted it. And she said her father was an antiques dealer, so she'd learned a few things. And Owen watched all this happen, and afterward, he said, "That felt good, Mama, helping the school." And Sarah hugged him and said, "Yes, it did." And she realized Marcus had been right. Owen's ability could be a gift if they let it be. They started looking for other opportunities like that, places where Owen's ability could help without exposing him too much. And Marcus would hear about estate sales or charity auctions, and he'd bring Owen to look at items. And Owen would point out the valuable pieces that people had missed, and they'd make sure those items got properly appraised and sold for fair prices. And they helped a lot of people that way. Families who didn't know they had valuable items. Charities that were undervaluing donations, and Owen seemed happy doing it, felt proud that his special skill was helping. And Sarah finally made peace with his ability, stopped seeing it as a burden or a curse and started seeing it as just part of who he was, like being good at music or math, different but not wrong. And she and Marcus worked together to create boundaries and guidelines, rules about when and how to use Owen's ability, always prioritizing his well-being and consent. And Owen grew into a confident kid who understood he was different but didn't feel ashamed of it. And sometimes Sarah looked at her son and marveled at the strange path their lives had taken, from that first moment when a baby touched a journal and went still to now, a child who could sense the value and meaning in objects, and who was learning to use that gift in ways that felt right to him. And she thought about all the mistakes she'd made, the times she'd been too protective or not protective enough, and she forgave herself for those mistakes because she'd been trying her best in an impossible situation. And she thought about the future, about Owen growing up with this ability, about the choices he'd make and the person he'd become. And she felt hopeful because they'd given him the tools to navigate his difference, taught him that being special didn't mean being alone, and that was all any parent could do, really. Prepare their child for the unique challenges they'd face and trust them to find their own path. And as Sarah watched Owen examine a donated painting at another fundraiser, saw the concentration on his face as he felt for the special quality that meant something was valuable or meaningful, she felt grateful for the strange gift her son had been given, even though it had been frightening and confusing at first, because it had taught them all something about value. Not just monetary value, but the deeper value of objects as carriers of history and meaning and human connection. And Owen understood that in a way most people never would, and maybe that was the real gift, not the ability to identify expensive items, but the ability to feel the stories that objects carried, to sense the love and care and significance that people invested in things, and to help preserve those stories for the future. And Sarah thought that was a beautiful way to move through the world, being a guardian of meaning, and she was proud of her son for taking on that role even though he hadn't chosen it. And she was grateful to Marcus for helping her see that Owen's difference could be a strength. And as they drove home that evening with Owen chattering about the painting he'd examined and how it had been made with love by someone learning to paint, Sarah felt at peace finally with the strange, wonderful, complicated reality of raising a child who could touch objects and feel their worth. And she knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of confusion and fear and difficult decisions. But she also knew they could handle it together, her and Marcus and Owen, and that was enough.